I found some styrofoam parts and decided to make some grassland and dungeon tiles out of it. I started by cutting one side to a straight edge. From this straight edge I started to cut the whole piece to a width of 10 centimeters. And again removed the corner that wasn't straight. Measured from the new straight edge, I cut out a 5 cm part and two 10 cm parts. These 5 by 10 and 10 by 10 pieces I cut into a height of 1 cm. With the tile pieces being cut, I decided to mark out the grid line for a 5 cm grid. While normally preferring a 2.5 cm grid, the smaller grid size would give some problems in the build further down the line. But the 5 cm grid line make it also easier than no grid line even when playing with a 2.5 cm grid. After having the grid lines marked, I coated the underside of the base with a mixture of wood glue and grey acrylic paint, which will give a layer of protection and will reduce the likelihood of the styrofoam ripping when we poke the hole for the magnets. After the underside of the tiles has dried, it's time to mark the directions the poles of the magnet should be facing. For every square within the tile, I want to have the south pole on the left and the north pole on the right side. Keep in mind that the orientation of the magnets should be consistent through all of your dungeon tiles. It may be easy if you first start with it to make yourself a card which is showing the magnet orientation which you want to have for all of your builds, until you have it memorized in your head. Then I use the tip of an old glue bottle, which is a little bit sharpened, with an X-Acto knife to punch in the holes for the magnets. While this works with every type of styrofoam, a styrofoam with a smaller grain size makes your life a little bit easier here. While doing the holes on the corner, I only do one side of the corner at once. The holes for the other sides of the corners will be made after the magnets on the first side of each corner is inserted and properly secured. After the first holes being made, I put a drop of glue in every hole I want to put a magnet in, while never doing two holes which sit directly next to each other, which I do to prevent that the magnet will flip to the magnet in the next hole while still having wet glue on it. Before gluing each magnet, I mark the north pole of the magnet with a red marker, which will help to glue the white magnet to the white slot. The magnet size I prefer for this are 4 by 4 by 1 mm square magnets. After the glue has dried, I control all holes. If the glue has created any bubbles, use the backside of a brush to push these back down. Then into each hole which has a magnet inside, I filled in some structure paste. After the holes being filled, I simply smooth the structure paste with the help of a toothpick. This process helps to hide the magnet in the tile, while also giving it a further protection to not slip out of the tile. After the structure paste has hardened, I punch in the holes I left out on the first one, and also put in some glue into the remaining holes. And of course, also attach the magnets to the new holes. Then it was time for another one of the structure paste. After everything has dried and hardened again, I used a pen to carve out the grid lines. If you want to have the tiles look a little bit more realistic, you can also leave this part away. But since I have playability in mind, I prefer some distinct visible grid lines. For one tile, which I decided is gonna be a dungeon tile, I carved out some recesses here and there with my fingernail, which will leave me with a heavily deteriorated floor. Then I gave every tile a coating of wood glue mixed with acrylic paint. After the first layer has dried, I gave it a second layer for further protection. After both of the protection coats having dried, I started with the dungeon tile and gave it a black wash. After the wash has dried, I gave the dungeon tile a dry brush of white, which will help to make it look more stony. After dry brushing, I sponged on some brown spots to give it a more natural and dirty look. With the dungeon tile being completed now, I began painting the tiles, which are gonna be some grassland tiles, in a brown, earthy color. After the paint has dried, I coated the tiles in a layer of water-soluble glue and used an old red brush to get it in every notch of the tile. With everything being covered in glue, I sprinkled on some small pebbles and some flocking for moss. And finally covered everything in a layer of grass. If you have made enough of these, it's really easy and quick to build some dungeons for your players.